right, everyone. Welcome to CCI Huronia's 6th webinar. We're going to get started. It's just 1 minute past 7. This is CCI Huronia's 6th webinar on COVID-19 and how to deal with this crisis in your condo. My name is Sonia Hodis, and I'm one of the many directors at CCI Huronia, a condo lawyer, as well as your moderator tonight. If you've missed any of our previous webinars, you can find a recording of those webinars on our CCI Huronia website, ccihuronia.com, under the Resource Content tab. Who is CCI? We are an independent nonprofit organization formed in 1982. We have chapters across the country, and in Ontario we have 8 chapters alone. CCI Huronia is one of the Ontario chapters. CCI's main objective is education. However, we also advocate for condos, and we represent all those involved in condos, from owners to directors to professionals, and we encourage all these stakeholders to work together. CCI National has collected numerous resources relating to COVID-19 specifically, and they can be found on the national website at cci.ca under the Resource Center tab, or you can get a direct link right on the landing page. You can also find a link to the CCI National Resource Center on the CCI Huronia website under the Resource Center tab. This is a great resource for all those involved with condos, and it represents information from across the country. I also like to just let everyone know that CCI National is going to be hosting a COVID-19 webinar on May 7th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. And this webinar is going to be unique because we're actually going to have speakers from all of our chapters across the country from coast to coast. So we're going to get a national perspective on some of the issues that condos are dealing with during this crisis. And registration is now open, so you can go to the cci.ca website to register. And please don't forget to follow CCI Huronia on Facebook and find out about all of our upcoming events. So since last week, the big news for condos this week is that we have a new order from the Ontario government dealing with changes to the Condo Act that take place during the pandemic. And this order, which is Regulation 107/20, and specifically Schedule 4 of this order, deals with specific sections of the Condo Act, and it is retroactive to March 17th, and we don't know how long it's going to last. But right now it's in place. It deals with a variety of issues: AGMs, service of notices for meetings, board meetings by teleconference without consent, how you determine quorum, and virtual meetings and electronic voting. And so our cliffhanger for the beginning of this webinar is you got to stick around to the end to find out what does the order say about virtual meetings and electronic voting. We're going to tell you at the end of the webinar. So I want to welcome everybody back to another great lineup of speakers and topics. The agenda was set out in advance. We have many guests with us tonight, and we want to welcome our friends from CCI London, Jennifer Dickinson, Laura Glithrow, and Stefan Nespoli. And also we have a special guest, Dr. Mabel Sin is going to be joining us tonight to talk about building resilience during the pandemic. Debbie is going to continue to put up information in the chat box with respect to contact information for all of our speakers and some resources. The board of directors of CCI Huronia, our bios can also be found on the CCI Huronia website, ccihuronia.com. And tonight from our board of directors, we have Ashley Lamb, Patricia Aaliyah, John Jeffs, Joanna Tomaszewski, Jeff Struwig, and Michelle Farley. I just want to thank all of the board for dedicating their time in putting this webinar together tonight, and for the speakers for volunteering their time to be here tonight and also to prep for this webinar. And I just want to thank CCI as a national organization for their support. We've got lots of support from a variety of different chapters, not just in Ontario, but across the country. So before we get started, a couple housekeeping. Please mute your phones and don't unmute yourself during the webinar. We're trying to get a good recording so that those that can't be with us tonight can actually watch us at a later date. Also, please keep your cameras off, and if you're on your phone, please mute your phone. We are not taking questions live, but if you do have a question, you can use the chat box function and type your question in there. We'll be monitoring that chat box, and we'll try to get to those questions during the webinar, and if not, we'll get them next week. And finally, our disclaimer that you hear every week, please remember that the information provided today is general information, and since things are changing so fast, it's very important that you get an opinion with respect to your fact-specific situation, and it's more important than ever that condos rely on their professionals for this advice and these opinions in these challenging times. If you are a condo director, Section 37 of the Act is probably familiar to you to protect you from liability if you rely on professional opinions. However, I want to make sure that everyone understands that the information and suggestions being provided tonight is not a replacement for a professional opinion, and it does not provide you the protection that Section 37 is intended to provide. In addition, I just want to remind everybody that the information in this webinar is current as of April 28th, 2020. Things are changing so rapidly, and the information provided today may not be relevant or applicable in the future. And please be advised, if you're watching this webinar either live or on a recording and you're outside of Ontario, all references to legislation is to the Ontario Condominium Act or other Ontario legislation. So let's get right into it. We've got a jam-packed evening tonight, and we're going to start with the first topic, which is talking about how to deal with residential viewings in units. We know that open houses have been shut down, but we have two types of viewings: property viewings and final buyer visits. And tonight we're going to have Ashley Lamb, who's a real estate agent, and Jennifer Dickinson, who's a property manager, talk to us about how property managers and real estate agents can work together to make these viewings safe for everybody, but also make sure that they happen smoothly. So Ashley, are you going to start us off?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Sonia. I am going to give you a little bit of background as to how real estate brokerages are handling showings. Of course, we are very aware that having non-residents entering a condo building needs to be acted upon seriously. And I'm just going to go over some of those procedures right now with you. Now, property viewings, just as Sonia mentioned, are not just for those properties that are for sale, but final buyer visits for properties that have been purchased and are planning to close. Those types of viewings will also be taking place. So when a buyer is interested in viewing a property that is for sale or does need to do a final buyer walkthrough, many real estate brokerages have put COVID-19 showing policies in place to protect all parties during the requested showing. So after a showing, a viewing has been booked, the listing agent sends over the brokerage's COVID-19 buyer disclosure form to be signed. Signing off on this form indicates that the buyer and buyer's agent will comply with the COVID-19 policies and procedures for that specific listing brokerage. Now, some of the points that are listed in the form are as follows. Prior to booking a property viewing, the buyer has viewed all virtual tours, virtual open house videos, and property photos, and have a serious good faith interest in the property. So we're not looking at somebody that's just a nosy neighbor or somebody that's just trying to get more information. They have to have a serious interest in that property. No one attending the property viewing has traveled outside of Canada within the last month and have not knowingly been close to or been in contact with anyone that has confirmed to have COVID-19 in the last 14 days. They also have to state that they do not show any signs of COVID-19 themselves, and those possible symptoms are actually listed on that form as well. Many viewings are no longer exceeding 30 minutes. We want to minimize how long people are in the condo unit and the condo building. And it is limited to the buyers and their realtor. So no friends, no family are allowed to come into the showing as well as that final buyer visit. So no showings are confirmed until this disclosure form has actually been returned to the listing brokerage. Now, many agents are going above and beyond that. The listing agents are requiring some listing agents are requiring realtors to sign off on a health and safety form, agreeing to wear gloves and wipe down all surfaces where touched, and also minimize as much touching around the unit as possible. We are also encouraging sellers to just leave lights on, have closet doors open just to help minimize their risk. And also encouraging sellers to leave hand sanitizer at their front door as well, just to do their part, just in case. Now, please remember, once again, that these viewings are not limited to potential sales. Owners that have sold their units and entered into a contract with a buyer have a legal obligation to fulfill the agreement of purchase and sale by allowing that buyer to enter the unit for that final walkthrough before closing. Okay. Now, if a buyer decides to put in an offer after viewing a unit, they have the opportunity, as you all know, to read through the status certificate, bylaws, declaration, rules and regulations, and so forth of the unit by putting an offer conditional upon the buyer or the buyer's solicitor reviewing the said documentation. Now, if the complex has revised any rules due to COVID-19, I'm strongly suggesting writing a single page to attach to the status certificate, indicating any of those changes. I'm going to recommend writing a clause on that single page, not just stating any of the rules that have been changed, but also stating that the buyer is aware that all complex amenities have been shut down. Now, some amenities, obviously, you can look through windows, but there are many that you can't actually get access to. Doors will be closed. That they have not been able to view all the common elements, and that this is not going to affect the transaction. The last thing we would want is for a buyer to back out and not close because they have not been given the opportunity to view all the common elements. I think that this is an important thing to remind you that when you're purchasing a condo unit, you're not just buying a unit, but you are purchasing into that whole complex. And that indicates building amenities that are actually closed. So adding that single page informing the buyer well in advance will protect all parties involved in the transaction, including the corporation. The buyer legally needs to sign off on this condition, stating that they have had the opportunity to review with a lawyer the documentation and have fulfilled the condition and are satisfied with the package that has been provided. And I'm going to hand off the mic to Jen now.
Jen, are you there? There you go. You're unmuted.
All right. Thanks, Ashley. So I'll try to keep it quick. As previously mentioned, corporations should have a move-in or out policy. But right now, bridging the gap with your owners' realtors is really important, and probably more important now than ever. As a way to nip some potential issues in the bud, consider creating a policy for the sale and showing of the units as a property manager. Condo managers should reach out to owners preemptively with a communication asking them to consider what restrictions are in existence right now. Send an email with some of the following information and a posting at the building as well. Ask owners that if they're selling their unit while COVID-19 restrictions are in place, please consider some of the following items. Ask them to reach out to their condo manager after you've signed a listing agreement with the realtor, not before. Ask them to advise their realtors. They will need to send the building manager or the condo manager, whatever kind of policy you have set up, whenever there's a showing that is booked. We don't need to know that they're thinking about selling or thinking about a scheduled showing, but we do need to know once things are set in place. Ask your realtor to be aware that they are required to provide a copy of some form of the COVID-19 buyer disclosure form. This is a policy you should have in place. Have them provide the signed copy, and keep this on file. Also, the owners should be aware that when a showing is scheduled, we need to advise superintendents, and the superintendents will be charged with wiping down all surfaces they could possibly have, I guess, anticipated that somebody has touched. They've breathed all over windows, that kind of thing. So once those realtors do touch base after that signing and a showing is booked, you should kind of discuss some of the following items. Confirm they have that signed COVID-19 disclosure form, and then keep it for at least 2 weeks. We want to know where or if any illness is brought into the building. Confirm they're aware that the amenities are closed before they even get there. Ask them try not to gain access to them. We don't want them handling doorknobs if we can help it. Advise, though, if, say they can look in through the front window beside the entry and they'll see the library. Just keep in mind that the superintendent will have to clean the windows afterwards. And let them know, too, that door handles don't get cleaned by the building staff. They will need to govern themselves accordingly based on that information. So once you've spoken to your realtor, or rather your owner's realtor, advise the building manager or the superintendent of the scheduled showing. The showings will be half hour to an hour maximum. So ask them to wipe down the elevators, the amenity and entry doors, windows, and any kind of surfaces that they may have been in contact with. And realtors should also be reminded that the condo manager needs to know when those final showings are occurring, and will need to observe the same cleaning procedures as before. So that just one quick note, that one pager that should be added to your status certificate that Ashley mentioned should include, again, those modifications to your normal procedures, such as the moving rules, deposits, how they're handled, any new cleaning or social distancing procedures that have been put in place.
Thanks, Jen. So it looks like it's going to require a little bit more planning and a lot of communication, but we can still make this work and everybody stay safe. Ashley, there's a couple questions in the chat box that I'm going to direct you to, if you could maybe take some time and answer those. All right.
Yeah,
so
no problem. Thank you.
Thanks, both of you. So moving on, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about what do you do if you're living in a townhouse, and tonight Laura's going to talk to us about what do you do if you're a vacant land condo. Laura?
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know me, I am a condo lawyer in the London chapter. And in London, we have a fair number of vacant land condos. So for those of you who aren't aware of vacant land condos, they are a different type of condominium corporation where the units are effectively vacant lots that homes get built on after the declaration is registered. So usually the setbacks for those homes are a lot smaller than you would see in a typical subdivision. So the homes are going to be a lot closer together in those developments. There is also going to be common element areas, internal roadways, visitor parking lots, and amenity spaces would be part of those common elements. So like all condo corporations, vacant land corporations were impacted by the emergency order that came down in March, where all facilities providing recreational programs, even those on private property, were ordered to stop. So condo corporations, even vacant land corporations, although you may look like a subdivision, those amenity spaces are including parks, gardens, benches, outdoor community areas, outdoor exercise equipment. All of those should be closed for as long as those restrictions are in place. The Ford government has announced a roadmap to reopening the province, but it's not a calendar as the Premier advised. So there are no dates for when those outdoor amenity spaces those restrictions will be relaxed. So all corporations should be aware of what those restrictions are that the province has imposed, and the board should be mindful of what's appropriate for their own community. And even when we're in phase 1, where their outdoor restrictions are lifted, boards can consider what's appropriate to have in place and to continue to have in place for their particular corporation. One of the things that changed on April 25th was that the government relaxed the restrictions when it came to community gardens. So a vacant land condo corporation has a community garden space that may be exempt now from that policy restricting outdoor amenity spaces. And boards should again consider whether or not maintaining the closure of those gardens is reasonable and appropriate and in the best interest of the corporation. If those gardening restrictions are going to be allowed within the community, then some social distancing measures are still appropriate and necessary to ensure everyone's safety when in those spaces. When it comes to vacant land units, it's important to remember that the unit is the lot itself. So this may mean that unit owners have an expectation and the desire to garden in their own units in the front and rear of their homes. However, as I said, in these developments, the units are very close together. Often you are within 2 meters of your neighbor's garden. So it may be prudent for the board to impose a schedule for gardening so that homes with even numbers garden on even numbered days, odd numbers garden on odd numbered days, just to minimize the amount of traffic and congestion that happens in the front and rear of units. Again, this may happen when we're talking about other amenity spaces that still need to occur. So the community mailbox can be a gathering place for unit owners. Maybe we want to, look at having a calendar for that as well, where, the odd number units go on odd numbered days to the mailbox, and rather than creating a point where there can be some congestion there. The final thing I wanted to talk about is as the weather gets nicer, we are going to see likely more people spending time outdoors. And when we're talking about other types of developments, vacant land or even townhouses, we're going to see people wanting to spend time in the front and rear of their units. So in vacant land condos, oftentimes, increasingly I've been dealing with concerns about the driveway beers having with neighbors. So the health officials have stated that as long as you're staying 2 meters apart and as long as you're not gathering in more than 5, you are permitted to continue to do that activity and socialize safely with your neighbors. However, condo corporations, including vacant land corporations, need to be mindful of their obligations to make sure that there is no dangerous condition that's present, that unit owners are being mindful of the social distancing protocols, that we're not allowing some relaxing of these rules and allowing drinks with a few neighbors to turn into drinks with more than 5 people gathering together, because that's where health officials have said that situation is not safe currently. And it may be prudent for for condo managers and boards to remind the community as a whole about what those expectations are for outdoor activities as we move into the warmer weather, and where we're going to see more and more people wanting to spend time outside and wanting to have some social engagement with their neighbors or with people who are visiting.
Thanks, Laura. So if you're in a vacant land condo and you didn't think you had to think about COVID-19 and how it impacts you and your community, Laura's given us some great tips on things that we need to think about if we're in that type of condo. All right, moving on. I know we're all sort of fixated on getting through day to day, but Stefan's going to talk to us about how we can use the COVID-19 pandemic to actually look forward to the future when it comes to planning. Stefan?
Thanks, Sonia, and I'll take the opportunity to thank everybody on behalf of the CCI London chapter. Huge thanks to the Huronia board for their initiative and leadership in putting on these webinars. They've been really wonderful in connecting condo people from across the province and the country. So I'm speaking tonight from a professional engineering and reserve fund planning perspective about planning for projects that are taking place in the future, so 2021 and beyond. So I acknowledge that it's important to try to stay present, but planning for the future is absolutely something that your corporation needs to be thinking about. This too will end, and there are some steps you can take today to make sure that your corporation is ready when it does. So as with all projects in the condo world, we have to start by talking about your reserve fund study. So that's the long-term planning tool that you use to set your contributions. In some cases, cash-strapped corporations will have had to defer projects. So they're trying to alleviate some of that financial pressure today on their owners. And so they're updating their reserve fund study and maybe pushing some projects that were planned in 2021 or 22 out to maybe 2023 or beyond. And so from a market standpoint, corporations that are in a strong financial position today actually have a lot of leverage. If they have major projects planned at any time in the next 5 years, our argument is that they should consider moving those projects forward. With all this uncertainty, it's never too early to start planning for the future. So what can you be doing today? Step one is going to be reviewing your reserve fund plan. So take a hard look at your current reserve fund plan or ask your engineer for feedback. I know this topic's been discussed at length. You want to look at how urgent are the upcoming repairs, what's your current funding level, what's your risk level if you did want to defer some repairs. Your engineer can help you evaluate that risk level, and maybe you're looking at other financing options or loans that would facilitate pulling repairs forward. So if you decide that there is a project you'd like to get started on, or your corporation's in a strong financial position and you have major repairs planned at any time in that 5-year window, the next step would be to initiate what we call the restoration process. So that's a 4-step process that all of your building repair projects should follow. So step one is to complete a condition assessment. So that's have your engineer assess the condition of the component. So say your roof. You want to compare options for repair or replacement. You want to look at what the pros and cons are, and you want to confirm the scope of repairs working with your engineer and the board. Do you want to replace the roof anchors along with your roof as an example? Once you've agreed on the scope of repairs, you want to move to preparing a comprehensive bid document and specification package. So that includes a clear scope of work so contractors know what they're pricing, clear COVID-19 provisions and requirements if you have them or if you want to incorporate those, and also detail the work that's to be completed under the contract. So that package then gets tendered to qualified contractors and you get apples to apples pricing. So remember, we're still looking out into the future. When you're pricing this work, you can include options for completing the work in 2021 or ask contractors, well, what would the price be if we complete it in 2022 instead? Because there's still so much uncertainty. There is potential right now that some contractors are pricing work aggressively because there are fewer projects being tendered as a result of some things getting pushed off. So step 4 would be the construction phase and crucially getting to the point of awarding the contract. So once you get the tender pricing, you're not obligated to move forward with the project. You can evaluate how that pricing compares to what was planned for in your reserve fund study. And you can either decide, no, we're not going to pull this project forward. We're going to sit on it for another 2 years. We'll wait and we'll see. Or you can look at what your other financing options might look like. And then finally, when the project's complete, you'd want to update your reserve fund plan with what the actual costs were and make sure that you still have a strong financial position moving forward. So the final tip I would give to condo owners today to help plan for the future is to take a hard look at the next 5 years of your reserve fund study, see what projects are planned. And if you have the funds to complete the work now, work with your professionals to consider whether it might be beneficial to do so or beneficial to at least start down this process and see where the pricing comes in. Another possibility is you price the work that's supposed to happen 4 years from now, and the pricing is much higher than you have planned in your reserve fund study. That's not a problem. Now you can start saving for the next 4 years before that project takes place. So that's also, it's not a lost cause there. And then if you don't have funds in your reserve fund study, either review alternate financing options or see what can be reasonably deferred to alleviate some of that financial pressure.
Thanks, Stefan. I see there's some questions in there in the chat box for you, so you might want to take a look at that and if you get a chance to answer them. All right, so we're going to try something a little new on the webinar tonight. We're going to have a mini panel discuss what to do if you have ongoing or upcoming projects. We're going to look at actual examples and then some practical and legal considerations. And on this panel, we have Patricia Alia, John Juss, Joanna Tomaszewski, Jeff Struig, and Michelle Farley. And I believe, John, you're starting us off tonight.
That's correct. I'm going to sort of lay the general framework of how it is that projects are proceeding with building permits. And I was pleased to find that many municipalities who have been forward-thinking, in particular in Barrie, right in the heart of Huronia, has actually stated quite simply that the chief building official has the discretion, which he always had, but he can allow portions of the work to be occupied and reviewed by other means. And then they go on to say that the means are any or a combination of photographic evidence, video recording evidence, in brackets, FaceTime, etc., and engineering reports. And this is quite interesting. Our company has been continuing with its regular inspections of projects that are proceeding. And as qualified professionals, we are required by the Professional Engineers Act of Ontario to do our duty. And that duty involves personal review of construction. And so many of the other people in the industry are realizing that we are uniquely, at an advantage. We must be there in person by law, and they may be there. And some of them are choosing to not be there, thankfully, so that they can help crush this curve. And they are accepting, with proper statements and so on, that, somebody with the skills and requisite knowledge has taken this picture. And in fact, they even give required wording to be attached, saying that the person doing it confirms that they are responsible for capturing the imagery and that they are a fair and accurate depiction of the construction and or demolition at the time it was ready for the relevant inspection stage. And why does this matter? Well, it matters a lot because many of the buildings that we need in the future are being built now. And so these projects were identified in the various emergency orders as essential projects and so on. So they'll continue on, and they'll continue on with probably the same or better oversight than in the past. And the reason why I say that is municipalities, especially many smaller municipalities, were very hard pressed to keep up with the building booms in their area. And now they've automatically gotten, by virtue of the COVID-19 situation, professionals coming in and going from their site and providing strong, clear statements on the compliance. And a sidebar to that is that some of the other professionals in the industry are saying there's no point in three of us going and looking at, for example, the completion or lack thereof of an air barrier or a vapor barrier. One of us can go and document, and the other two can rely on that first one's documentation. And so it's becoming quite commonplace, and I think we'll see that this will be a lasting legacy of COVID-19, will be a general acceptance, even in good times, for different ways of getting the work done. I will post in the chat box some of the links to both the City of Toronto and the Barrie comments, but I just want to now throw it off to, and I've got notes here somewhere, to Joanna, who gets to pick it up from here and talk about a real project in place.
Thanks, John. So I'm Joanna Tomaszewski from Bayshore Property Management, and I have an example from, I guess, the backyards of condos. And so how is it possible that we actually have a project on the go at a townhouse complex in Aurelia? And to start, it's an old complex with back decks that are no longer up to code, and they're just not safe. So last year, the board has approved the project to proceed this summer with the replacement of 111 decks. And the contractor was anxious to start in the spring, applied for a building permit to the City of Aurelia. The end of February, received the permit at the beginning of March. And then, of course, COVID-19 happened. So late March, we were all wondering, is it going to proceed or is it not going to proceed? The contractor confirmed that he would only have 2 people working at a time and practicing the physical distancing. Then we contacted the city of Aurelia. The building department agreed. The building inspector agreed to actually come on site and do the inspections. And then, of course, the last thing was notifying all the owners. And we've done that in several stages of notifying all the 111 residents, then contacting, and of course, in the notice, we've advised them that the upcoming work has all the requirements of COVID-19 government regulations, and everybody has to abide by them. And that includes all the patio doors have to be closed. Nobody is to approach the contractor or, of course, the building inspector as well. We followed with phone calls and notices to the individual units that had a start date already assigned. Those, thank goodness, were not all 111. It's 10 units at the time that we're doing. We've also provided the contractor with a letter that he is working on behalf of the corporation and as an essential service, so that he has that backup if somebody questions it. We did have calls to the city that, hey, there's people walking around and doing some work. The first decks have been completed and inspected with everyone following the COVID-19 regulations and recommendations. And I think this is a really good example of how we can adapt work and complete jobs within what we call the new normal and keeping everyone safe. So if you have an approved project lined up, please check with the contractor and the municipality, consult your legal counsel before, as one would say, you put the shovel in the ground. Because it really appears that each municipality has their own interpretation of what is essential. We see it all over the place. It's different in Bracebridge, different in Aurelia, Midland, or Bear, and I'm sure it's different everywhere. So please check with the municipalities, and also keep in mind that this is only for projects that already have permits. There's, as far as I know, new permits are not available at this time. So stay safe and stay home if you can, so that we can throw this COVID-19 to the ground. And next, I'd like to introduce Jeff Strewing from Slope to Shore Property Management, who I'm sure will have other projects to tell us about.
Thanks, Joanna. Close, short of slope, but that's
Sorry.
all right. So tying into what John and Joanna have said, each municipality is handling things a little bit differently, and actually in the case of emergency repairs related to safety and so on, they are issuing permits in some municipalities, particularly if it's outdoor work that needs to be completed for safety reasons, and can be done so with adequate physical distancing. The projects that we have underway right now, physical distancing and precautions have slowed process. Speaking with contractors, they're losing about an hour a day for extra precautions, depending on the type of the project, from sanitizing tools, especially if they're shared tools like large saws and so on, additional hand sanitization, keeping distance wherever possible. Sometimes there's tasks that require 2 individuals and they're having to wear masks, and additional sanitization taking place. More education to the owners and providing barriers to keep homeowners and guests out of the work site. And clear communication with the owners goes a long way in that regard as well. The building department in our case with this project is not attending the site. They are not sending inspectors out there, relying on the engineer commitment to review the project. The engineer has been taking pictures and video, sending them to the building department, and we have received approved inspection orders electronically in response to that. And so far the project's carrying on. And earlier today, I got word a permit's being issued for a project that we just submitted the permit for last week. So, and that's in town, Blue Mountains. So.
Thanks, Jeff.
And I guess I'll hand it over to Michelle.
Thank you. I feel like we're playing tag team.
You're it now, Michelle.
I'm it. Well, fire incidents have increased substantially in many municipalities. They're reportedly up 17% in Toronto alone. Last week, there was a condo balcony fire in Toronto, and there were no injuries, and the residents evacuated observing physical distancing. But now the building will have to undergo fire, engineering, and insurance investigations, and then balcony and suite repairs commencing under COVID-19 restrictions. So how do we get this done? You've already heard a little bit about ongoing projects, and if they've already started, that they can continue. But if the work is at all related to life safety systems, means of egress, including exterior walkways, underground garages to exits, and paths away from the building, even the rear decks that Joanne talked about earlier, they could be an alternative means of egress in a fire, and therefore they are essential, and they will be able to continue. Because everybody's home, and we're having a lot of people complain about odor migration, we're getting a very high level of odor migration complaints. So if the complaint is due to a nuisance only, in many cases that can wait. But if the odor migration is considered to be either a health or a smoke spread risk or hazard, then the project would proceed. So for upcoming projects and ones that we have ongoing due to fire orders and notices of violation fires, and just even work that suddenly appears somewhere because of requirements within the fire code of means of egress, we recently planned a capital retrofit egress project within a building, and we submitted the permit just last week electronically, as John was speaking about. So in many cases, the building permits can be applied for online. There are developing methods or for milestone reviews that may include permit inspections by other qualified persons. The tendering process, which we're also undertaking, can be achieved using video conferencing or telephonic participation. Most contractors are operating safely, and they are available to perform the work that is required. So projects, particularly if related to safety issues, can continue, albeit adapted to COVID protocols. And you should continue to consult your professionals. Risk will be considered and an assessment conducted where necessary, but most projects can proceed safely. I do have another quick update for you. We're having a lot of questions about whether you should be going in suite or not for some of these remedial repairs, and also even simply for fire alarm annual or monthly inspections. So this just in from the Canadian Fire Alarm Association, they have provided recommendations for fire alarm contractors, which could also include capital work if they're doing a retrofit in your building. The recommendation regarding testing of fire alarm systems refers to condominiums specifically, and in my 30+ years of experience is a first. It includes potential for relief under the satisfactory and safe approach to testing a device which cannot be achieved and will be identified in your test documentation. So I'll quote the example that they've put in. If you, the technician, the property manager, or the homeowner do not consider access to the condominium in-suite device or renovation or testing to be safe, then the subject devices would be identified as inaccessible. So what does this mean? It means in general, in-suite testing or in-suite work related especially to life safety systems may be able to be waived until a later date, but not more than 2 years from the last date of testing. So we have a lot of questions coming in about this and other types of work projects that include means of egress. There's some clarity finally on the record as a result of some of the changes, directives, and orders that we're receiving. And from there, I'll pass that on to Patricia, who I'm sure may have some comments in this regard.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, going ahead with projects and all of this information, I think what's also important from a governance perspective is that boards should be minuting their decisions. They should be clearly indicating in their records What is the basis for going ahead? Is it safety for the property or for person to proceed with the project? Was the project previously planned? Is it midstream? Then it should be documenting, can it be done safely? You've heard that from several of our speakers. And so that should be reflected in the decision-making process of the board to make sure that our directors are also protected. If a letter is going to be issued to provide confirmation that something is an essential service or falls within the parameters of the order, it should be from a professional that is able to issue that kind of a letter. It can't just be with the board writing the letter and making that determination. It should be backing itself up so that they've covered their duty as well in terms of making sure that they're relying on a professional opinion so that there's no personal liability. Information also has to figure out how to be exchanged between the parties and do it in a way that the corporation has the right to retain certain information. Because, for example, if you're going to be collecting data, medical information about possible exposure of employees of a contractor, you need to have a policy in place to use, collect, and disclose that information so that it remains confidential and it's used for the right purposes. As well, as we're listening, Jeff brought this up, there are going to be longer times for these projects to run because of additional steps. And so the question will be, what about the additional costs? So what I'm suggesting is boards ask the question to find out if there are in fact additional costs and delays so that everybody is aware of that so you can keep expectations reasonable. As well, in terms of evidence that John talked about, the photographic evidence, I'm recommending that boards also collect that evidence for their own records because it's great that we're relying on this kind of data and we have it in our records, but just to make sure that the project is well documented, it's good if your professionals provide that to you. So that's it for me on the quick summary on the legal side, always looking at risk and, thinking ahead. Thanks.
Thanks, Patricia, and thanks to the entire panel. I can't believe you got all that information out in 20 minutes. So thank you for that. So now we're moving on to a new segment that we are starting to incorporate into our webinars, and that's dealing with issues surrounding mental health and how do we maintain and improve our mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic. And tonight we're very fortunate to have Dr. Mabel Sin join us, and she is the executive lead from the Wellness and Health Services for Altitude HCM Inc. And she practices in Newmarket, and she's been practicing in Newmarket for over 30 years. So Dr. Sin, can you give us some insight on how we can build resilience during this pandemic? Because it looks like it's going to be a long time coming before we're back to any kind of normal that we used to know.
Yes, my pleasure. So first of all, I hope you all remember the top 10 countdown from the late night show from David Letterman. So I have the top 10 countdown of strategies that you can use to build resilience during the pandemic. So now, since I don't have Paul Schaefer with me as a medical director, feel free if you're so inspired to put your own drum roll in. And these are strategies that are actually based on scientific data. These are proven strategies that will increase our resilience. So if you're ready, strategy number 10, it's exercise. So when we exercise, we actually have a different brain and nervous system that is more sensitive to pleasure and more resistant to the negative effects of stress. If you don't have room to exercise, be creative. See how many jumping jacks you can do, or see how many burpees you can do, or even better, put on some upbeat music and dance like nobody's watching. Number 9, meditate. No experience with meditation. There are lots of apps, or you can download all sorts of audios. You can start with 5 minutes if you've never had experience with it and build up to 10 minutes. Number 8, socially connect. Social distancing does not mean social isolation. Text is good, phone call is better, face-to-face, FaceTime or Skype is even better. Number 7, savor the positive moments. So when you have a positive moment, like having this delicious bowl of soup, savor it. Because for every 20 seconds that you take to savor a positive moment, like really expand it in your brain, use all your senses. Every 20 seconds you do that, it forms a new synapse in the brain. Okay, that's an electrical connection. And over time, these synapses form new pathways in our brain, which allows us to develop a more positive brain. Number 6, look for the silver lining. The way our attitudes are based on our perspective. So when something negative happens, look for something positive in it. Okay, find out what you can learn from it. Number 5, gratitude. So not taking anything for granted, keeping a gratitude journal, for example, or you can write down on a piece of paper things that you feel grateful for and put it in a gratitude jar. And at the end of the week, or you can share it with family, or whenever you feel down, you go to the gratitude jar and read what you've written. Number 4, embrace your difficult emotions. So for those of you who are math geeks like I am, here's the mathematical equation. Suffering equals pain times resistance. So when we try to push away our pain, we actually suffer more. So there's a saying which says, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So recognize that it's normal to feel fear, it's normal to feel anxious. Recognize that and embrace that, because this is what makes us human. Number 3, kindness. People who show kindness are actually happier people, but only if they choose to be kind. So if they're forced to be kind, that doesn't work. Number 2, self-care. So self-care does not mean self-indulgence, okay? It means that you look after yourself the same way that you would want to look after someone that you love, because you should love yourself. So it means eating well, getting enough sleep, and showing self-compassion. Okay, talking to yourself like you would talk to someone that you love. And then number 1, acceptance and letting go. Okay, I put the 2 together because they kind of go hand in hand. Acceptance does not mean resignation, because you can accept something that is true without liking it. And letting go is a choice that you will no longer ruminate on things that you have no control over, and instead use that energy and focus on things that you do have control over. So I'm sure you all heard about the term PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a term called post-traumatic growth, and that's our ability to become stronger when we overcome obstacles. So my question to you is, are you going to be a victim of this pandemic, or are you going to be the owner? By applying those 10 strategies, you will be able to experience post-traumatic growth. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Dr. Sin. And a big drum roll out to you, and David Letterman is not to worry about who's going to be fulfilling his shoes. Thanks for that top 10 list.
Thank you.
All right, so we're getting to the end of our program for tonight, and we wanted to address a question that came up last week through the chat box. And the question was, do you need a bylaw to hold a virtual meeting and voting? And Ashley Winberg is going to address this question thanks to the Ontario government. So Ashley, what's the answer to that question in light of the recent order that we got on Friday?
The short answer is no, you do not, while the order, which is going to be in place for 90 days, is in force. It could also be renewed after that 90-day period. So as many of you know, condominium corporations have to hold their AGMs within 6 months of the end of their fiscal year end. So the order essentially provided 2 things. The first is that virtual owners meetings are now permitted. So owner meetings can be held by way of telephonic or electronic means, so over the phone or by way of a platform similar to Zoom. Owners can attend in person by way of attending over the phone or over an electronic platform such as Zoom, or by way of establishing a communication link to the meeting. Owners can also vote at such a meeting by way of indicating how they wish to vote by electronic or telephonic means. There is a service provider called Get Quorum that does provide hosting services for virtual condominium meetings. And if I apologize if I'm speaking quickly, I only have a couple of minutes. Get Quorum, they're the only service provider that I'm aware of in the market. I'm not condoning or promoting their services. I'm just letting you know that they exist. And I looked into them for some of my clients, and essentially they provide a platform using Zoom in order to host a virtual meeting. So there's 3 different permissions. There's a host, a speaker, and attendees, and there's various different functions to ensure that the meeting is run properly. And their services include distributing all the required notices, doing a run through the day before. They do the registration process, and they also provide the meeting inclusive of their cost. And the meeting takes about an hour and a half. Now, although you can have virtual meetings while this order is in place, you don't have to, because the order also provides that if a corporation was supposed to hold their AGM when the emergency order is in place, that corporation can hold their AGM up to 90 days after the state of emergency is lifted. And also, if you're a corporation who is supposed to hold or is supposed to hold your AGM within 30 days of this emergency order being lifted, you'll then have 120 days from the date that the emergency order is lifted to hold your AGM. So the order provides essentially 2 things. Virtual AGMs are now permitted, as are other types of owners meetings, and also extends the deadline to hold AGMs.
Thanks, Ashley. And if you want to know about what things you need to consider when you're holding a virtual meeting or you're doing electronic voting, come back next week, because that's going to be one of the topics on our webinar next week. So we've reached the end of the hour. Once again, it's just gone by so fast. I want to thank everyone for joining. If you have questions that you weren't able to put in the chat box, you still have a couple minutes to do that. Otherwise, send your questions to admin@ccihuronia.com. And just like the question we asked Ashley, we will try and get them answered in upcoming webinars. Also, we are still trying to collect tips and tricks on how to survive COVID-19 in the condo context. And Dr. Sin gave us 10 today that we can add to our list. But if you have a tip or trick, please send it in to admin@ccihuronia.com and let us know where that tip and trick came from, because we would like to acknowledge the person who's provided it. We will collect all those tips and distribute them at a later date. Don't forget that today's webinar has been recorded, and hopefully within the next 24 hours, we will have the webinar posted on our website. So if you want to watch it again, please feel free to do so. But more importantly, if you know someone who wasn't able to make it tonight and would benefit from any of the information that we had, please let them know and tell them to visit our website at ccihuronia.com. I want to once again thank our friends at CCI London for joining us tonight. I also want to give a shout out to a couple other CCI chapters who are having upcoming webinars. CCI Eastern Ontario is having a webinar on April 30th called "There Are No Stupid Questions and Virtual Beer." That's going to be worth checking out just for the virtual beer. You can register at cci-easternontario.ca. CCI Toronto is having a webinar on April 30th as well called "Looking Past the Problem of Mental Health," and you can register at ccitoronto.org. The Golden Horseshoe chapter is having a webinar on May 6th dealing with condominium contractors and COVID, and you can register at cci-ghc.ca. And finally, don't forget, CCI National is hosting a Condos and COVID-19 webinar on May 7th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. Registration is open, and you can register at cci.ca. Thanks again to all of the speakers. Our next webinar is on May 5th at 7 p.m. An e-blast will be going out in the next couple of days. Please register again to get the login details. And until next time, I'm Sonia Hodis, and I'm asking you to be safe, please be patient, be kind, And please, please stay home. Do your part to protect not only the essential workers that are still putting their lives on the line to help us get through this, but also those who are medically compromised. It's a small thing that we are being asked to do, and together we can flatten the curve so that we can all eventually go back to work, go back to school, and get back onto our recreational amenities. From the entire CCI family to yours, wishing you a good week, and we'll see you on May 5th.